Okay, folks, we're back to this topic. Unfortunately, the Groyper War is just so exciting I can't look away. I've been trying to, pace myself out and keep up my normal variety that I have of doing, economics, foreign policy, all that stuff, things that matter. I always say that people focus way too much on the theater of politics and crap about like, oh, Trump's getting impeached or he's not getting impeached and you're a dumb libtard, and I try and avoid that. But in this case, the reason why the Groyper War matters so much is because these people who the Groypers are targeting are not good people. These are the unserious people. These are the people who make me hate politics so much. These are the people who just live off of, selling silly little books. Books they didn't even write that are full of vapid ideas that enrich no one's lives. And these people say nothing interesting. People like Charlie Kirk. They are the pundit class. They are, above all else, I guess you could say they're the avatars of the establishment. And therefore, they are avatars of the enemy. And so therefore, whenever I find anyone who goes against these folks, whether it be someone like Jimmy Dore on the left or Nick Fuentes on the right, I cheer them on to the extent that they do this. And so that's why I'm very proud to report that for those of you who didn't watch the stream last night of Don Jr. and Charlie Kirk's event at UCLA promoting Donald Trump Jr.'s new, his book, quote unquote, I doubt he actually wrote it, his new book, Triggered. It's such a creative title because, those libtards, they get so triggered and they can't handle old Trump telling the truth. And so here's Don Jr. to set him straight. And so he was there to hawk his book. And, they wanted to do the normal turning point thing to where they come in. They have the president's son here. You'd think that there'd be all these libtards in Los Angeles who'd come in and ask him, questions and say, like, your dad's a racist. How do you feel about that? And then he'd come in and he'd say, well, I don't care because you're a libtard. And then everyone would cheer and it would, get like 5 billion views on Facebook. However, they weren't able to do that, and it became clear once they came on stage that there wasn't even going to be a Q&A. Let alone the kind of Q&A that the Turning Point has, built their business on. It was a very bad night for the Turning Point folks because they came on stage and said, hey, guess what? No Q&A tonight. We're not going to do it. And, you have to ask yourself why. It became pretty obvious as the event came on. Because as things went on, you tended to realize, based on how the crowd was reacting to certain things that were said, that, this is not a crowd full of angry leftists. Like they were hoping for. You'd think, hey, this is UCLA. This is a big public university in one of the, the top, the second biggest city in the country, and, one of the meccas of the left. So this should be a great place to find some libtards, right? Well, no, the audience was full of groypers. People who were there, knickers, in other words, people who watch, Nick Fuentes' show, who were there to ask Charlie Kirk and Don Jr. tough questions. Questions about, conservatism. They were going to ask them questions from the right. They're going to ask them stuff about, immigration and, social conservatism and all these things that, Republicans cared about in 2005. And that's no good. You're not supposed to talk about those things anymore. You're not supposed to remember that, even during the Bush administration, when, we had a very, pro-open borders president, ostensibly in George W. Bush, the conservative movement overall was very skeptical of immigration. They wanted to, build a wall. They wanted to, stop bringing in so many people because they were saying, oh my gosh, look at all these people we're bringing in. They all vote Democrat. We need to shut down immigration, all this stuff. These were very mainstream positions when I was growing up. This is just how Republican people in general talked. And, when it comes to the ordinary voters, that hasn't changed. The Republicans that I know, one of their top issues is still immigration for most of them. And they want there to be less immigrants because they're worried about people coming in and voting Democrat and committing crimes and doing all sorts of bad things that, Ann Coulter and Donald Trump talked about in 2016. And yet official Conservatism Incorporated, doesn't want to talk about that. And they pretend like anyone who brings that up is a member of the, the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterspartei or something. I just butchered the German pronunciation of that, but that was what first came to my head. And, of course, I mean the Nazi Party, the party of Hitler and Goebbels. Those are the people, apparently, who are concerned about, immigration in this country, And, of course, good patriotic Americans don't have conversations with Nazis. You just ignore those people because they're evil. And, of course, who's a Nazi? Whoever we say is a Nazi. So it's a great way of getting out of having to debate your foes. And but they thought they could get off that easily by just saying no Q&A and then they could have their event. That wasn't the case. The Knickers did not allow that to happen. They heckled them throughout the entire event. And everything, you could tell every time that that they were speaking up, they were chanting, Q&A, Q&A. They're probably going to play that off today and say, oh no, they were just chanting USA. Those leftists, they weren't Knickers chanting Q&A, they were leftists chanting USA. And of course, why would a leftist chant USA? It doesn't make any sense. Because it sounds to me, based on the audience, that the people who were loud in the audience were not the left. The left, it seems, just sort of went outside and did their little protest thing like they normally do, and they didn't want to come in and talk to anybody. The ones who were eager to engage with Don Jr. and Charlie Kirk were only the Knickers. And eventually, this heckling, it got so bad that Kimberly Guilfoyle, Don Jr.'s mistress, former wife of the current Democratic governor of California, Gavin Newsom, and former, Fox News legs chair pundit, she got triggered, just like one of the libtards in her boyfriend's book, and she jumped up and started screaming at the Knickers and saying how you're all a bunch of incels, and I bet you do a lot of online dating because you certainly can't pick up chicks the way you're acting right now, and it was really dumb insults. The kind of things that you would expect from the left, ad hominem attacks, saying how, oh, I disagree with you politically, you probably can't get laid. Which, hey, I mean, what would you expect from the, someone who would have been the first lady of California had she not gotten a divorce? And so she answered these chants of, Q&A, Q&A, by getting up and screaming, because they were all sitting in stools on the stage like they normally do. She got up, and she couldn't handle it anymore. She grabbed her mic, and she, in a very shrill voice, and she said, "We will answer your questions." But, of course, that's just an untrue statement, because they weren't answering any questions. That's why the people were chanting Q&A. So that made no sense. And you could see the body language was just so fun to watch. First of all, Charlie Kirk, the little man that he is, was sitting there up on a stool. He didn't even have a mic. Couldn't talk. I mean, the poor guy. I mean, they might as well just gagged him and rolled him off stage, on a wheelbarrow or something. Because he served no purpose up there. It was all, Kim and Don Jr. Doing their thing. And so Charlie was up there, and you could just see his little face was scrunching up tighter and tighter, and you could barely see it because he was so upset he didn't know what to do with himself. He wanted to reach out with his arms and try and give somebody a hug, because he needed to feel another person's warmth to comfort him in this moment of weakness. And Don Jr. was looking quite annoyed, I think, with that rather ugly facial hair that he's growing out. Just my personal opinion. He was scrunching it up and looking around and he was trying to give his little stump speech thing and say like how, oh my gosh, women are so much better off since my dad got elected, and isn't my dad great, and all you guys, all you libtards out there, what are you thinking? And he just couldn't get through it. And eventually they just had to cut the event. Not only did they cut the Q&A, they cut the event off. After 30 minutes, they walked off stage to boos. They were booed off stage, which was absolutely remarkable. They couldn't hold it together. They lost control of their own event. They could not control the room at all. And so, I mean, this was total shock and awe, scorched earth, on the part of the Groypers. Because they destroyed this man. They didn't simply go there, like they were planning and ask, Junior and Charlie Kirk some tough questions and get their honest answers. That's all they wanted to do. That was the goal, right? I mean, I've watched Nick's stream a couple of times now, and he made it pretty clear. Unless he was lying, unless there's some secret, Discord server that they have set up to where they're talking about their real goals, and he's just lying on his show. But the way he's talking on his show, hey, we just want to ask these guys some questions, because we see some contradictions in their rhetoric and the way they act, and we just want to clarify things and make sure that they are being good sentinels of conservatism. But this, whatever they would have accomplished by asking questions, this is way worse because Charlie Kirk and Don Jr. here were completely humiliated. Frankly, I don't know what Charlie Kirk does after this. And this was after, the Groyper problem was already supposed to be taken care of. They got Ben Shapiro out there to give a speech condemning Nick Fuentes without naming him, which was very funny. He sort of had a little mock debate where where Ben Shapiro was playing both himself and Nick Fuentes, and he would make a point that he would attribute to Nick Fuentes, and then he'd some straw man point. Some of them I went over that before. I did a video on Shapiro's speech. You can watch if you want. That was supposed to be the knockout blow for Nick Fuentes and the Groypers. The Groypers were not supposed to recover from that. That was supposed to be the end. That was supposed to be the last that anyone ever heard of the Groypers. And that's just not the case. Here on Sunday, they came back stronger than ever. I think this was the best performance that they've had since, the Ohio State, event that kicked off, I guess, this whole movement in mainstream consciousness. That's when I started paying attention, was that Ohio State event. And this was fantastic. I think I watched a bit of Nick's reaction stream last night to it, and I think he said that it couldn't have gone better, and I agree. From his perspective, and again, to the extent that when he's doing this stuff, I'm rooting for him, absolutely, over somebody like Charlie Kirk. These are bad people. Again, Nick's not my cup of tea, but at least he seems to, he has the right enemies. Just like Jimmy Dore. I don't want Jimmy Dore to be president. I don't want Jimmy Dore's preferred candidate to be president, but we both agree on who should not be president. That sort of thing. It's the same thing here. We both agree, me and Nick, who should not be the leaders of the conservative movement. So I think it's probably safe to say that by this point, Donald Trump knows who the Groypers are, because I'm sure Junior went home crying to Daddy. That these mean old frogs were not very nice to him out on the West Coast, and that they're becoming a problem. And I wonder, what the president might think of that. But I certainly don't think that they were able to just limit their attacks to Charlie Kirk and make it seem like they were on Junior's side, which I think was part of their strategy. Was they wanted to come in and be like, hey, Junior, we're trying to, protect you from this interloper, from this bad influence, Charlie Kirk, but we like you. I don't think they really accomplished that. I think it pretty much seemed like all three of them were the object of their ire. And so at this point, I expect things to escalate. After seeing this, after Ben Shapiro's supposed knockout blow fell flat, I think that this is going to keep going and keep growing. And in fact, there were a few congressmen that gave, a couple that seemed to at least acknowledge that this story is happening, even if I think I saw on Twitter that the Groypers were trying to spin this as like, oh, we were endorsed by 3 congressmen. Nah, that's not really seem really. But at least you were acknowledged. Matt Gaetz was one of them, but Matt Gaetz first tweeted, like, hey, I stand with Charlie Kirk and TPSA, and then he said, which was an awful tweet from someone like Matt Gaetz. You would expect better of Matt Gaetz. But then he followed it up with, hey, I think that we need open discussion and debate in America, and that's what we're all about. And that was sort of what the Groypers are taking as sort of a tweet of support for them. But you're a long way from getting I guess their full support. So I wouldn't get too excited yet. But it is progress that you're being acknowledged, because being acknowledged is a very important part. Even if people are attacking you, at least they're paying attention. Nobody cares what I say. I could call Charlie Kirk a vicious neo-Nazi, and he wouldn't care what I say. Matt Gaetz isn't going to come out and say, you know what, Charlie Kirk is not a neo-Nazi, but, Sultan of Smug deserves to be heard because this is America. Matt Gaetz isn't going to come out and say that for me. So anyway, things are heating up, and this is the first glimmer of hope that I've had politically in a long time. Over the years, my view has only ever gotten dimmer and dimmer. It's never really gotten brighter. But here's one. The trend is still very clearly down. In my attitude. My attitude keeps getting worse and worse. But it's a little less bad now than it was 2 weeks ago. Just because this is this isn't overtly good, but it's positive. It's you could say that it's disnegative. It's not quite as bad as the status quo. And so with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.